Thank you for being here with
Yeah.
Unmasked. It's really exciting. This is not a show about religion. So I'm going to start with the first question. Why rabbi?
First of all, it's such a pleasure to be here with my good friend Boaz.
Of course.
Was that a serious question? Or that?
Yeah, very. I want to know why did you choose to be a rabbi?
Wow. It's interesting. I became a rabbi because when I went to Israel, I was very, very inspired. I went to study when I was 18, 19.
You grew up in the U.S.?
I grew up in the U.S. I grew up in Brooklyn, towards Flatbush, Sheepshead Bay. And I was not particularly religious or serious in high school. I was having a good time, like I think most people do as teenagers.
I don't know how many people are actually religious in their high school.
Yeah, you just, you kind of get it all out of your system, and then you hit 18, 19. And I went to Israel, and I was very, very taken by the religion, my connection to God. And I decided I wanted to help other people get that connection. And it's kind of interesting because I'd always kind of like had a business direction. I always figured I'd go into law, real estate, things like that. So I went into the religious business, the God business, and ironically, most of my career has been doing the business part of the God business.
Yeah.
So it's been like a really kind of good mix for me.
Was it a calling, or was it more like, I don't know what to do? Like, many people I meet go to law school because they finish college, they don't know what they want to do, and their generally father or someone says to them, look, education cannot be taken away from you. Go to law school, and then to see what you want to do, and then become attorneys. Was it different? You're like, I don't know what I want to do, so maybe just let me go and become a rabbi, or is it actually a calling?
I've never, no one's ever asked me this question. I've never thought of it this way.
There'll be many questions today that no one ever asked you. Just as long as you're ready for it, then we're good.
I'm ready for anything. But the truth is, that's exactly right. It was a calling. I absolutely was a calling. Like I felt very, very connected to the Almighty, to God. I was always connected to God. I was not one of those people that ever wrestled with, is there a God, atheist, agnostic, all those pieces. I was always sure there was a God, and I had a relationship, and just my relationship deepened. And as a result, I came back after 2 years in Israel, and I went into a youth group called NCSY. I walked into something called Shabbaton. It was a weekend, and I looked around, and I'm like, okay, this is what I want to do. And then it took me 9 years, and then I became a regional director, and then eventually became the national director. I was there for 22 years. But
so I want to pause because
sure.
It's and by the way, I have no idea where this conversation is going to go. Okay, so just so
Excellent.
you know, I always have a list of questions, and I never use them. So when you say there was a calling, was it about you servicing the community, or was it you about serving your belief?
Wow. That's such a good question. I think it was both. I think for me, I'll tell you how I view it, and I still view it till today. I mean, it hasn't really changed since I was 18, 19. But I view it as a calling to God. I think that to me, the Almighty is the ultimate. I view myself as His servant. I view myself as someone extraordinarily close to Him. And I view Him wanting me to do this work and help other people. So, some people get into it because they really like helping other people. Otherwise, they would have been a social worker.
Community-based rabbi, or I would say community leaders, call it with a rabbi or something else. Yeah.
That was never me, not a bad way. I like people, but I'm very, very driven. And so for me, it was all about God. And then it was kind of taking a step back, and I still, till this day, literally every day, think about what does He want me to do. And I really believe that the work I went into was exactly what He wanted me to do. I always looked for, what can I do that other people can't? Okay, that's where I need to be, and that's where He needs me to be. And that was kind of my approach. So it was very, very, as a calling, as you said, very God-driven. And then I wound up helping people as a result because I felt that's what He wanted me to do.
That's fascinating. I'm gonna go back to it because it's interesting, because the reality is, like you said a few minutes ago, you were more the business part of the, service business or God business or whatever you call it. So even though you did not choose more the spiritual element, you more tangible spreadsheets, managing people, which we're going to have a conversation about, if I understand correctly, it's directly connected to your belief and your spiritual world.
Absolutely, it is. When I was young, early on, I did a lot of the interactive kind of spiritual pieces, and then as I got older, I heard something that Henry Ford said. He was an anti-Semite, but
that's
he
amazing that the first example you choose is to use one of the biggest anti-Semites of America. Yeah,
I felt if I could take him and
I love that.
shove it into Judaism, how great is that? And he said something very powerful. He said, I'd rather have 1% of 100 men's effort than 100% of my own. And, I looked at that and said, yeah, I can go out and I can just kind of, minister or work with a certain amount of people, or I can help, all these other rabbis or spiritual workers or, whatever the term is. I can help so many more of them do their work.
So
that's where I want to be.
There's an element of momentum. So,
Correct.
I mean, you gave an example, but we spoke, momentum is, in the beginning, it's 1,000 units of effort gives you 1 unit of success. And then with time, with momentum, you get to a place when you put 1 unit of effort and you get 1,000 units of success. So that's what time gives you, right?
Yeah.
So you chose, if I understand correctly, you chose to be managers of managers versus actually working directly with the community.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. I love when I go to communities and I love when I have those experiences. But for me, I put back, a lot of people do this work and they want to get that buzz, that spiritual buzz. I have such a great feeling when I've done this, I've done that. For me, I took a step back and I almost like prevented myself from becoming that spiritual good feeling addict, so to speak, to take a step back to enable so many other people to do the good work they have to do.
When do you, okay, so if I hear you correctly, you're saying basically I'm a farmer. Right? That's where you plant, you put seeds, you water it, you make sure like it's not beaten by birds, etc. But you're so busy in the day to day, you never get a chance to pause and see the extraordinary experience of something growing right from the ground. But saying that, are there any moments that you pause and you say, "Wow, look what I accomplished," or what the work we've done accomplished?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
When does it happen?
Last night, I was mentioning we were in here before, and
Yeah.
we had a screening. We did this great film about the anti-Semitism on university campus, and I was on a panel, and I was one of them. And I explained we created this list for the World Science Congress, all these different pieces. And then there were 2 collegiates there. One was Shabbos Kestenbaum, who is the young man who's suing Harvard right now and been very involved in campus, and another Taylor Shaw, who was on Rutgers campus. And I'm sitting there, and they're just talking about their experiences and the pain and what they went through, everything. And I'm like so moved because we created this film.
When you say we, you mean your organization, the organization you're running?
Aish, yeah,
okay,
yeah,
fine.
my
okay.
organization created this film and gave these students a voice to talk about their pain, and here they are. Like, I'm like humbled. Like, what do I bring to the table? Like nothing. I just.
Well, you brought the infrastructure.
Yeah, correct. So, but
it's critical.
It's a step. It's a step removed almost. But like, I'm listening to these young people and saying, my God, like our community's got to make space for young people to lead, and that's I'm pretty passionate about that. I've always been passionate about that. I think young people. I think they have it right. I think sometimes we get older and cynical, and so therefore, you hang out with young people, and you're like, oh man, they think they can conquer the world, and that's frankly the way it should be.
Yeah.
We shouldn't lose that sparkle in our eye.
It reminds me, as you know, I've been in real estate for 20 years, and there's a tradition in New York. I think it's a New York thing, but that when you top the building, when you pour all the concrete, you get to the top of the top, you do a party. And you stick a flag, like you stick the United States flag on top of the building. That's a very common practice in construction sites. And I always thought about it because it's actually the foundation that is much more important than the top. The top, yes, it's great, right?
So true.
But without when you have a messed up foundation, you deal with leaks, with the building is moving, with a million things. And so it sounds to me like you're busy building foundation, and those kids were like the top of the building, but you guys provided the foundation.
Yeah, look, I walk in a room with young people, and I know that someone in this room, God willing, is going to take my job one day, and I think there's nothing greater than that. And a lot of our community, we kind of stay stagnant, and we're not moving forward. And it's not just our community; it's like anything like that, any business, anything. You just kind of get cautious and used to everything. And
say more about that. What do you mean cautious? Like, is it cultural behavior? Like, you think that any organization people get comfortable and cautious?
Yeah, and it's not only organizations. I think it's businesses. I think it's everything. You have like this is all good. Let's just keep. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to do anything that might tip it over. But if you don't take chances, then how can you do great things? And that's our history has just told us that. So I think enabling young people to do great things is what has kept Judaism going for ages. And frankly, I think a lot of companies need to do that instead of, a lot of companies here in Manhattan, you turn young people into indentured servants. Maybe in 10 years you'll be a partner, make big money, but till then you have to work 20 hours a day and don't ever think for yourself. I think
so I'm baffled because, and again, I had no idea the conversation is going to go this way, but you're an Orthodox rabbi.
Yes.
in the DNA of Orthodoxy, is there something that about tradition and keeping it in a strict path, right?
Yep.
And then you speak about the needs to expand and challenge, right? How do you live with those two? Because again, you're also in the business world, which is,
Sure.
the universe. It's not a business thing. You either shrink or expand. Everything from planets to humans, we either expand or shrink.
Yeah.
And you're saying, look, if you're not gonna expand, you're gonna shrink, right?
Yeah.
How does an Orthodox guy deals with this statement?
So I'll give it to you with a parable and example I give to a lot do people when I'm trying
Like
to
a good
explain-
rabbi, you're going to
Or-
tell me a story.
I try to explain
Yeah.
Orthodox
Yeah.
Judaism,
Yeah.
and I tell people, you play basketball? Do you ever play basketball? By
I do.
Everyone
Yeah.
plays a little basketball. So you're in the middle of a regulation game, and you're driving the ball up the court, and then you dribble it up into the stands. You turn around backwards. You throw a ball over your head. It goes swish. This is like primetime YouTube, right?
Yeah.
How many points do you score?
0, because you're out of the.
Because you're out of bounds.
Yeah.
So Orthodox Judaism is the court, right? And you can't step out of bounds because God, gave you certain rules, which we respect in sport, ironically,
Yeah,
but not
yeah.
so much in religion,
Yeah.
right? But if you're on the court, man, do the most awesome trick plays you can do. You can do incredible things on the court.
So you
just
find
beyond the court.
Yeah. So you find a lot of, again, to understand what you're saying. Here's what I hear. You find substantial amount of freedom inside the rules of the game.
Yes.
And let's call that game, for the sake of this thing, Orthodoxy Jewish. It's a game. It's like there's rules, there's regulation, there's, et cetera, et cetera. So from your perspective, God gave you those rules. Inside of that, there's a lot of freedom to reinvent, play differently, try different things, but inside the rules of the game.
Yeah. I went with my son to the Football Hall of Fame, and I had to be in Cleveland. My son came in for the weekend. We went there. We had an awesome time. It's actually great. I highly recommend it to so many people. But we went into one of those. They had one of those booths, the instant replay booths, where you're the ref, and there were like 5 scenarios, and we're watching. Did he break the plane? Did he not break? The minutia, and people could fight over this for weeks. And
We have rabbinical studies,
Yeah,
like with this
yeah.
books and books about arguing in
So-
in Gemara about a particular thing. It's the same thing,
Exactly right. So
Yeah.
it's so funny that in sports, everyone respects rules. You have to have rules. Otherwise, you're not playing the same game and you're not. But wow, what people can do on the court, in basketball, slam dunk contest or, all these different things, right? I believe that religion's the same way. I got to have, God's give me some rules, but man, on the court, I can fly, but I got to respect the rules.
Oh,
And that's
good.
orthodoxy.
I love this conversation because here's what comes to mind. So if you look at the book and you look at the way our workshops goes, games is a big part of it. Like life is a game. You play games all the time, right? So if I follow your career, you're a fixer. You show up in places that do not work.
Yeah,
And you
yeah.
fix them. You're a
Yeah.
fixer. You're
I like broken stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You like broken
yeah.
stuff. So let me ask you the first question around that. What broke them? Because we just spoke about rules and games, right? So there was a game, and then they broke the game. They broke the rules. They broke whatever they did. So what's the common thing you see around broken organizations? Where did they go and break it?
Yeah, I think that the most common thing I see is just at some point, they were doing something and it was going well, and the world changed on them, or the founder passed away, or founder syndrome. The founder doesn't want it to change, and at some point they needed to shift and change, and they couldn't bring themselves to do it.
Why couldn't they?
I think that's human nature. I think that's, the famous example is Kodak. Like why couldn't Kodak figure out that we were going to have cameras on our phones? They just couldn't, and they disappeared, And so I think that also, a lot of religious institutions like that also, for example, for Aish, we had done a lot of work on our website. Aish.com is a big website. People know it. It's been around since the beginning of websites. And all of a sudden, about 5-6 years ago, we took a look around and we said, look, no one young is going to websites. If we don't get on social media, we're going to be in trouble.
So did you notice that? Was it an aha moment, or was it you brought consultants, or you saw a decline and you said, I have to? So a lot of people, I spoke with an NBA player, and I said to him, what made you be so driven? And he said, fear. I was surprised by his answer. He said, I came from such a poor family.
Wow.
That fear drove me to become an NBA player, which is an amazing answer.
Beautiful. It's a beautiful answer, yeah.
And so was it that you just watched the numbers and you're like, we're going to either become obsolete or relevant? Or was it more, again, of you saw a vision of here's how we should behave?
Yeah, it's a cart and horse kind of question. And the answer is for us, we did something called Entrepreneurial Operating System. It's
Yeah,
called
EOS.
EOS. A lot of businesses
Great
do it.
system.
And what I like about it, and I always quote, which is, vision without implementation is delusion. Right? You and I were smart guys. We have the greatest vision in the world. If you don't know how to make it happen, it's not going to happen. So when we went through this process, we sat around with Rabbi Berkowitz is one of our top rabbis, other people, and we basically said that the majority of the Jews in the world are totally unaffiliated. They're just not connected to anything. And we wanted to reach out to them. So we set a goal of 3 million Jews, which is 20% of world Jewish population, that we were going to get them to study Jewish wisdom as a pathway to God. Right?
Okay, so I want to pause because this,
Sure.
like I said in the beginning, this podcast is not about religion, right? So if I listen to it, and there's nothing wrong, this is amazing, right? If I listen to it from a business perspective, what you said is that there's a potential of X amount of customers, right?
Correct.
And X amount of people, you said 30% of people?
20% of world
20% of the world
population.
customers,
Yeah.
let's call it for the sake of the conversation, are not in touch with our product. Or not in touch with any product. Not just
Well
so
said.
exactly. So it's not just like they don't buy my product. They don't even interact with
Nothing.
the product.
Connected
They
to
never
nothing.
buy sneakers. Like
Yeah.
let's just say as a simple example. You said if we come into the marketplace and we actually interact with the people who never bought sneakers, we will be a dominating force.
Correct.
Okay. Because that's what the lesson is. I mean,
Yeah.
again, it's in your
And then-
vocabulary. It's in the Jewish world, but it's not about
Correct.
that,
And then I would take just one step further
Yeah.
was, okay, now that we set this BHAG, this big, hairy, audacious goal, how do we do it? And we turned around and said, wait a minute, the website's not going to do it. We can't do it in person. That's a lot of people. Social media. Everybody's on social media. We need to be on social media. We need to figure out how to work social media. And we started to learn it. We started with almost, this is going back about 4 years ago. We had almost no followers. We didn't really have good social media. Today we have over 4 million, and we're doing 1 million video views a day on social
Incredible.
media because we just said this is where we need to be, and we pivoted.
Yeah. Okay. So look, if we had any guess, I don't care who you are, whether a sport team or and someone promised me within 4 years to have 4 million followers, I will be like, this is a huge success. Okay. If you actually translate to money, you would be like a unicorn. So what do you do? What made you? And 2 questions. First of all, was it someone's vision? Because you look in your mid-20s, but I think you're a little older than that.
Older,
Exactly.
yeah.
So it's not natural for you and me. I'm 53 years old, so I understand the need, but it's not natural for me. Did it come from someone in the team, or was it something that you realize it's needed? And how did you build to such a following?
Yeah, no, I think the realization that we need to be in social media, I think we all realized it. Myself, look, Ray Kroc went to see his first McDonald's when he was in his late 50s.
Yeah.
Even though you can be older, you could still kind of think that way. So we all kind of realized that. But what I did realize pretty quickly is I've got to hire an expert, someone who is, and I hired a young woman named Jamie Geller, who I looked around. She had billions of views. She knew the lay of the land, and I did that. I have a philosophy in general, the way I run my business, which is I find really good people. I let them do what they're good at. I stay out of their way, and I make sure everyone else stays out of their way.
How do you know if they're
That's
good?
my philosophy.
That's amazing.
That is my philosophy, 4-step philosophy.
It works very well, but
Yeah.
let me poke on it. How do you know they're good people?
Well, look, you do your due diligence, and you hire who you think is going to do the best job. And
Yeah, but I hired so many people that I thought were great, and then I found out that they're awful.
hire slow,
And I had to-
fire fast.
Exactly, it's so hard.
That
Isn't it?
is what it is. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it was interesting. Early in my career, there was from GE, Jack Welch. I was a big Jack Welch fan from GE. He was terrific. He wrote really good books, and I remember once
He
I
cooked
had
the books also, but that's later
Oh,
on. After.
I can't speak to that. I can't. But he had he was the first person to take HR and put them on the C level.
Yeah.
And I had an article from him where he said, look, even the best hires in the world, only get it right. Like, I don't remember, it was like 60% of the times. He said, but the problem is that people sometimes they get so wed to their hire, they don't want to make a change, and that's where the mistakes happen. Like, everyone's going to hire people that just don't pan out, and it's not even our fault. Like, they're talented, they just can't get it done. So as long as you're focused on what you need to get done, and you truly can see that they can accomplish, and look, the other flip side is you and I both know everyone's got a little bit of shtick.
Of course.
I tell people, if people are 70-80% good, and I know what the 20-30% shtick is, and I can just kind of work around that, I'm good to go.
That's amazing.
because no one's perfect.
Yeah. The question is, do they stay? Because one of the challenges I saw over the years, you hire someone, if it's going very fast, well, they run it to full capacity. Many people were great. When I took my company from private to public, I had to change my entire accounting department because the people, I had an amazing woman work for me. She was, the head of bookkeeping. She was not a fit anymore to running a public company, right?
Yeah.
So and it's hard because people have been with you when you're growing. That's and you kind of convince yourself, oh, maybe they can change, So are you running your team more like a sport team? Because sport, the Netflix have that theory of management. It's like the company is a sport team. It's not about personal relationships. If you're a good player, you're on the field. And if you're not, you sit on the bench. That's the end of the story.
Yeah.
Nothing personal, right? And many companies, especially the last few years, we had anything that came from Silicon Valley, everything. It's more about like we're a family and we care. And you're a non-for-profit in many ways. So for you, it's even more difficult because the same person you go to show with.
I'm going to see them at a wedding next week. Yeah,
exactly. So do you lean more to the sport team model, or do you lean more to like it's big family?
Yeah, look, I as I said, I kind of run as a business, and what I try to do is I really, really, really try to be careful that like if we have to let someone go, that we really have to, and because of exactly what you're saying, we're a small community. But the flip side is also true. I've had consultants come and work with us who, they're like, oh, let's just find someone else, and they realize for what I do, there's not a huge pool out there of people that actually understand some of those pieces. So we have to be a little more understanding, a little more careful. We just don't have that large pool but what we do is as we grow, we try to figure it out. I had one of my divisions was running out of Israel and they just couldn't take the volume anymore. And I had some long heart-to-heart talks with the person doing it. I said, we're going to hire someone in America and we're going to figure out how to work this all together. And it's working quite well. We did hire someone in America. It was someone that I let him lead the process. We hired someone really good. So even though they have kind of similar responsibilities, we just needed people in different places and we were able to work through it. That's not always the case. But I think, if you have good people, the best way to do that. But you're absolutely right. What gets you from A to B is not necessarily what gets you from B to C. And that's when the challenges come in of whether, people
you feel guilty because the people brought you from A to B. You're like, I'm going to C. And you guys are maxed at B. So do I let you go? Do I replace the team? Yeah. It's a real challenge, right?
It is, but I will say also the one thing I've learned as I get older, which is there is something to be said for loyalty and someone having your back. And even though if someone, may not have 100% of the skills I need, but, they're close, but I know that I can trust this person with anything. That also factors in. I don't think that's a non-factor in terms of, trust. Trust is so huge in these things. When you don't trust someone, you can't get anything.
No, if you don't trust them, you can't even start working with them. At the moment people break trust, then it's impossible to work with, because then you're busy managing what you think about them, or what should you say or not say, or what should you expose to them or not. So trust
we try to be incredibly transparent. I always joke with my guys. I said, look, I'm never going to stab you in the back. If I stab you, it's going to be right in the heart. You'll see me coming. But like we're very open, and so in a meeting we may argue or even fight, and some people be taken aback. But like that's it. As I say, we'll continue with the sports analogies. We'll leave it on the court. That's where it was, and now we move on, and we all know where we are.
Yeah. When you come into a place, a company, a not-for-profit, do you bring your own team, or do you fire everyone? Do you work with whatever was already there? What's your style?
My style is not to walk in and fire everyone at all.
So you don't do the fork in the road email that Elon Musk sends, either you're with me or you're gone, with the famous email, fork in the road, on Twitter,
So, it's interesting. As the head of a nonprofit, there was a fellow by the name of Richard Joel who ran Hillel. He transformed Hillel way back when, then became president of university. But there was a point where he was trying to get some things done, and it was really hard to get them done. And he got everyone in a conference room. He sat them around the conference room table, and he says, look, I got really good news, and I got some bad news. So the good news is that there's a plane on the tarmac outside, and it's ready to take off, and there's a seat for every one of you. The bad news is there's no room for any baggage, and you got to make a decision if you can leave it behind. Because every time he was asking you to do something, they're like, nah, we tried that, it didn't work. They get the naysayers.
Do you think it's possible? I mean, I love the example, right? But the reality is you work with thousands of people. I work with thousands of people. And do you think it's possible, or I'll ask a little differently, what do you need to do as a manager to get people to get rid of their baggage and luggage?
Yeah. I have in organizations, I have a 20-60-20 rule, which is
20-60-20
rule,
Okay.
which is when you walk in and say, we're going to do this, 20% of people are like, woohoo, we're in, I'm in, whatever you want, we're there, you know? 20% of people are just sitting there going, nah, never going to work.
Judging,
they're
assessing.
just not, 60% can shift. And so
what happened to the 20 and the 20? If you actually studied your theory and you went back to, let's say, 2 years, is the first excited 20% stayed in the company, or they're just one of those like, yeah, come on, let's go, but they actually, and the other 20 like are reserved, like sarcastic and like it's not going to work out? Do they stay, or
most of the bottom 20 wind up leaving?
Both 20, both sides.
I think the excited people they'll get on board and all that, you know. But my point is, I try. You have to work with the 80% and not get bombed down by the 20% what they're saying. And what I like to say is, at the point where the train starts to leave the station, no one wants to be left behind. And then everyone kind of gets on board, and that's where we're going. And then if they can't continue, then they got to go someplace else. Doesn't mean they're bad people. They
no, it's not a fit. It's not a personal thing. Yeah.
And in nonprofits, we actually struggle with that probably a lot more than for-profits.
Explain to me, like why?
Because there's relationships there, like I said.
And is it different than business? Don't you think that if I hire someone, I look at their resume and I call a person that used to work with them and say, hey, what do you think about Mary? Like, you don't think you think is your world different than a business world?
I think it's different in that, people are not there for the money. They could be making more money. I could certainly, if I went into real estate or law or something else,
of course.
it'd be a different thing for me. So I think there's a lot of passion, a lot of belief in there. There's a reason, they went into that work. And so sometimes it's more emotional. There is someone once told me years ago, Rabbi Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, said, he said that Cain and Abel were brothers. They used to fight. It wasn't until they mixed a religion in that they killed each other. So you have to realize that when it comes to religion, people are very passionate. I mean, most of the world's wars, have been fought, the Crusades, all the different things. So people get very emotional. Like this is, because it's not about me, it's about God, And so I think there's more emotions in the room. I think there's more down the table. And also there's less compensation, and it's harder to point to dollars because I'm not selling widgets, I'm not producing dollars. So therefore it's like, what do you mean? You're saying, I think we're having a big effect there, right? By the way, one of the great things about social media is I can measure it every second of every day. And I happen to love that.
It gives you really clear black and
really
white
clear
statistics.
Really clear. Not like, do you think they were moved or not? It's like if people came with good content and they looked at our content and we went up this percentage, we're doing well, you know?
Yeah.
But
do you have more compassion to people who are working in the non-for-profit world? Do you feel, I have to be nicer to them because they came because of passion? Or you say, look, in the end of the day, we're running a business. We have a balance, we have income and expenses, and we have to be profitable. Where do you live in those two worlds?
Yeah, I think you have to have a certain amount of compassion. If someone is given 25, 30 years to a certain cause, it's not so simple to just, and they have not really made a lot of money in their lifetime because they've been so dedicated. It's not so simple to just, do a clean sweep, which is what I mentioned before. I don't usually come in and do that. If someone is obstructionist and not allowing us to move forward, there's no question, But I would say that a lot of the people that I've helped to transition out, we've given them a pretty good deal. I probably overpaid in certain ways, giving people
because you want
deals
to take care of them.
Yeah, it's just the moral right thing to do. They really, they gave their lives, and now we're going different directions. So you try and take care of people and their families as best you can, and you move forward.
Yeah, my daughter graduating from school, and she was debating about going to the business world or not for profit, and she spoke with someone. He gave her advice. He said, start with business and then come into not for profit. You're still passionate a few years because it's very difficult to switch the other way around. Is that
absolutely correct? Absolutely correct.
So explain to me his. It was his recommendation, but how do you see it from your perspective?
In America, people get on a certain road, and if you start a nonprofit, they're kind of suspect when you want to switch back. Israel's not like that, by the way. People can jump back and forth all over the place. But and not only that, I'll take it a step further. When someone comes to me and says I want a career in nonprofit, I tell them go get an MBA, go get a law degree, go get an MBA, go get some degree. That is, I personally got my master's in medieval Jewish history, which was really interesting at the time. It's never helped me, but it was what it was. But I do recommend very much for people to get MBAs or people to get law, and if they want to start out, I think that's fine. Also get a little experience. But I think those degrees are so important. I went later on. I've been, I know you've been to Harvard. I did a nonprofit training course at Harvard Business School in the summer. Went to Kellogg, also a similar type program. I've done some stuff like that.
It sounds like it was more of intellectual stimulation for you than actually business tools, right?
Well,
you feel like you needed some intellectual stimulation.
Yes. And the truth is, I always tell people if I had like a year or two, I go back to business school. I had such a good time there. But the truth is, at the point that I went, it was some of the things were really interesting. But I think, as you know this, in life, when you've done this over and over again, you've managed people. You're more limited in what you're going to learn, in those classrooms. Those classrooms really are for people kind of
coming into the world. Yeah, I mean, I think there's wisdom that comes with experience that cannot be taught. It's the reality. You rarely see someone in mid-20s with wisdom.
Yeah,
they have a lot of knowledge, maybe they're hardworking, but they don't have wisdom.
Yeah, I look back at my career and I look at those times where I ran into a brick wall head first.
Yeah,
and those now, I mean, those were invaluable learning experience. At the time, it hurt like heck, but ultimately, that's how you grow. That's how you learn.
Yeah. All right, a word from our sponsors. Aish is running in the upcoming World 2025 World Zionist Congress elections. For 50 years, Aish has been at the forefront of defending and strengthening the Jewish people. Today, the challenges we face are greater than ever. This is your moment to stand with us. Join Aish Ha'am, a slate of leaders who are actually fighting anti-Semitism, defending Israel, strengthening the Jewish people. So please vote, and you can vote now at aish.com/vote. It's AISH.com/vote. It costs $5 to vote, goes to WZC, and it turns into $1 billion for the Jewish people and Israel. So when you go into an organization, someone calls you and say, Steve, come save them or save us. What do you look at first?
So I get a lot of people calling me for advice constantly. I've always thought about consulting. I've never kind of done it, but I do it pro bono, all the time for many
after
people,
this podcast.
Put me on the map.
Exactly.
Put me on the map.
Yes.
Yeah, look, the first thing I do is I have a heart-to-heart with the person calling me. Usually it's the head of the organization a lot of times or the head of that division. And I'll have a heart-to-heart and just try to understand where they're getting caught. Is it that they don't have the skills? Is it they don't have the money? A lot of times it's politics. A lot of times people don't realize that people are petty, and you don't realize that person's, you're just not talking to them in the way that you need to talk to them to get done what you need to get done. That was a big part of my career in understanding that. Each person, you just need to speak to people in a certain way.
Yeah, but that sounds like an advice to me, which is very important. I'm asking if you actually had to turn a company around. You go in. So yes, people go to you, your source of knowledge and wisdom, and you say, okay, let's just talk about what you're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
But now the next level is actually when you come into a company and someone asks you to turn around, not successful. They either ran out of money. They like you said, the founder is getting older. They don't want to grow. There's other politics involved, whatever it is. What is the thing you're looking at? How do you know to assess what you're going to be dealing with?
Well, it's a great conversation. I have a conversation about EOS, which, as I mentioned before,
they should give us percentages.
They should. They should. I'm a fan.
It is a great.
This is what
system.
changed our company 4 or 5 years ago when I did it with Amy Holt. She's amazing. She was our consultant. And I had the conversation are you willing to do something like EOS? And I've actually told people you're not ready. You're not ready for this pain.
How do you know that they're not ready?
Because I'll start saying things like, no, we can't change, we can't do this. There's so many barriers. You have to be willing to change. Sometimes, you got to fall on your face to be able to pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and go forward. For something like EOS, you need to take a step back and you need to take the people off the table and just look at structure and say, where's my structure going wrong? Right. And my decision making, well, of course you can't make good decisions because, you're trying to consult these 3 or 4 things. I have a phrase I use all the time. All my guys know this. I tell them, I call something a camel. A camel is a horse built by committee, right? You sit in a meeting and this one says this one says that. So you wind up with something that no one likes. Yeah. It's a camel. It's a weird looking horse, because no one wanted to be confrontational and say, whoa, we cannot do all of this. We got to figure out the way forward. Yeah. And that's what happens in a lot of these situations. And unless you kind of break it down structurally so that there's a clear line of decision making. Like someone's got to be able to make decisions. There's statistics that people would rather work for a boss who makes decisions who they don't like than a boss that they do like who doesn't make decisions. I took a test really early on in my career, and on a scale of 1 to 10, I scored a 10 on decision making, right? So I was like young and arrogant, I'm like, oh, that makes me awesome, right? So the person says to me, she's like, yeah, except that you make decisions in your mind really quickly. You don't take the time to explain to everyone else how you got to that decision, and they all think you're flying by the seat of your pants.
So that's that's part of implementation, right? So you can have a brilliant idea, but the implementation of the idea is. And by the way, most people fail in implementation.
Oh, absolutely.
Because every other person, if you're an entrepreneur, if I taught at universities and I lead seminars, and people come, oh, I have a great idea. And you know how many people have great idea? They don't do anything with it, because the challenge is not great idea. The challenge is how do you actually implement that idea and you make it into a reality.
Vision without implementation is delusion. I literally live by that. And look, I have things I have now, thank God, a really big organization, a big business. And I said to someone recently, we were trying to do a recording studio to do stuff like you're doing. And I'm like, I've been advocating for this for 5 years and it's finally getting done. And they're like, I don't understand. You're CEO. Why don't you just tell them to do it? I'm like, if I just tell them to do it, they don't want to do it, and it's gonna flop.
Yeah, it's called enrollment. So you want to enroll them in the vision.
Correct.
It wasn't just about you. There's different styles of.
You have to lobby. It's ironic, right? You're CEO.
In your own, exactly.
Right. You have to lobby, and you have to win them over. And once you win them over, oh man, like you can do anything. But if you just try to play the dictator, like we're just gonna do this now, and the other thing I say is that big businesses and organizations are like cruise ships. You could turn the wheel all the way to the right. They don't turn like this.
Yes,
they turn like this.
Yeah.
So you can't play with that. You can't. And that's the biggest issue I think I see in these organizations across the board is they have a certain strategy, and then the CEO wakes up and says, "Okay, now we're going to do this strategy. No, now we're going to do this strategy because someone said something to him in a hallway."
Or CEO
disaster.
leaves. That's another thing. Like just to from an organizational perspective, that's the big ship. Many companies lose the CEOs every 2 years. So every person comes in and says, here's a new vision. Let's turn all the way to the left. Let's turn to the right. Yeah. And I think about it from a military perspective because, I grew up in Israel. And I say the difference between like the Soviet army versus the more Western way of, Israeli army. It's the officers leads by example. They run first. The risk of it is that they get hurt first. But many of the Soviet way of thinking about military is like, you push the people. I mean, look what's happening in Ukraine right now. It's kind of, you take the prisoners and you say criminals and prisoners, oh, you're either going to spend the rest of your life in prison or you're going to become a soldier. But there's no enrollment. It's all about fear and pushing, and it doesn't last. Maybe it's good if you need to, like a lot of people dying, just kind of, but it doesn't really get people excited. So you can't really run an organization about fear.
And then talk about the military. Take it to the next step of the military. You talk about October 7th, where you had all these low-level soldiers were saying, hey, there's something going on over there.
Yeah.
And it's very similar to what happened in Nassau. When they knew there was an issue and they couldn't kick it. It's a famous example.
Yeah,
they couldn't kick it up and it wound up blowing up. And the same thing here. So how are you paying attention to the lower down people? And that's something also that's a major CEO role.
Yeah,
what's going on.
Like a 360. Do you is your door open?
It is. I mean, it is. I try and do that.
If I work in maintenance for Aish, can I knock on your door and
I
say?
love the maintenance guys.
Okay, maybe it's a bad example, but someone who's not even directly in your building, because you guys are a global organization.
Yeah.
You're traveling to Buenos Aires, and there's a person who works for Aish in Buenos Aires. You never met her or him. How do you make sure that they can knock on your door? What's the culture creating that they can actually say, let me tell you what's happening, or let me tell you what's my point of view is? And how do you, because middle management gets really annoyed with that. Middle management have an issue. It's like, why did you go to the CEO directly and not come to me? You should have come to me, right? So how do you play with that?
So is that a good question? It's hard. When you're CEO, forget if you're nice or you're mean. There's a certain intimidation of the CEO's office across the board. There's a certain hierarchy, et cetera. I'll tell you how I do it. I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's wrong. I can tell you what I do is I try and talk to a lot of people. I don't wait for people to come to me because I think it's really hard for them to come to me for all the reasons you just enumerated. So a lot of times I'll speak to people, and I even have someone, I have like a weekly 5-minute conversation with someone, and their boss was a little frustrated with me, and I'm like, look, I'm just honestly, you can even listen to what we're talking. I just want to know what's going on. I want to hear, put my ear to the ground.
Do they give you the real honest answer?
I think so.
And how do you go back to the managers above that person and say, here's the feedback I got. I heard that X, Y, and Z. Like, because you got to empower both of them. If you empower the workers only and not the middle management is going to either try to block people from coming to you, or they're going to be like, why are you listening to them? I've been with you for a few years and I'm managing a much bigger picture. If you only empower middle management, then the people are going to say, you have no idea what's happening on the floor.
Yeah, I try and be very transparent. And one thing I don't like, I call it shadow boxing. We're like, well, you should know what people are saying. What do you mean people? Like, I don't do that. Like, tell me who, And so if I'm speaking to someone, people know I speak to them. It's not, I don't hide things back, and I'll pass it along and speak to them, and et cetera. I had one of my crucial kind of areas. There was a number 2 in there, and the number 1 was not giving time to the number 2. And I beat him up for it. I'm like, come on, we speak all the time. You guys speak to them, and then I would like walk in the office. And I'd walk up number 2, going, "Is he being good to you? Is he, And I do it right in front of him. And we laugh, we joke about the whole thing, But now he's putting in that time and effort. I happen to use humor a lot. I joke about things a lot, just because I don't like when things get tense.
Why is it? Because you want to soften people?
I think so.
Bernard Shaw said, "If you don't make them laugh, they'll kill you."
Yeah.
When he wrote the plays, which is
I never heard that. I love it.
It's a great. I'm probably chopping it and not doing it right, but the message was like, if you want people to listen, make them laugh, and then you can really create stuff. Because he wrote plays that were very critical of the British society, and he's like, you make them laugh, they don't notice, but you're giving them, So humor is a huge part of passing a message, right?
No, and I do it a lot, and especially like if someone really did something wrong and we called them on it, could be like a month later, in a meeting, I'll just make a joke about it, and so at that point everyone's like smiling, and it'll temper it down, and it's important. I think you do have to joke around and smile and this and that. And obviously, people need to know when you're serious, but you can't. People can't be sitting there like nervous and on the end of their seats all the time. So it's a balance. It's a balance like anything.
Yeah. That's amazing. Okay, I want to shift to 2 more things. One is hiring. Mm-hmm. You hired thousands of people probably through the careers you had.
Yeah.
Do you have a secret sauce? Do you have a procedure you follow? Like what if someone comes to an interview with you as a successful CEO, what's the tool you use?
There's two things I look for, and there's something I look at their resume for. The first thing I look at the resume is see if they jumped a lot. And I know today,
what's a lot? Because young people now switch jobs
I was
much
just
more
about
than
to say that.
Exactly.
It's changed, but if people are changing every year or two, that's and that's been going on for a long time. That to me is now it doesn't mean we're not going to hire them. Doesn't mean they're not great. Maybe
but
there's reasons.
It's a concern for you.
It's a concern. And I would ask them straight out, what's the deal? Because I don't want someone showing up for a year or two and then bouncing. I look for 2 things in the people I hire. The first one is humility. And when I say humility, I'm not talking about walking around with your head down or anything. I'm talking about humility is that the humility to know that other people can do something better than me, And
you see that in an interview, that humble element.
Well, you can see arrogance in interviews.
Of course, arrogance. That's true. You can smell arrogance.
So,
But it's funny because a lot of young people get the advice to give themselves titles that they didn't earn. So there's no more secretary. It's all about head of admin. Every job now has that big title.
I like
in
that
the resume.
because
Instead of barista, they're like head of beverages.
But Boaz, what would you rather give them, a title or money? I'm like, take whatever title you want, man. It's going to save me money. Exactly.
Yeah. People are fooled by that. That's one of the tricks that corporate America is very good at.
Yeah.
Everybody within a few years gets a VP something.
Yeah.
And they don't give them more money, but it's like, I'm a VP. Exactly.
Yeah, it makes you feel good.
Yeah. So sorry. So back to, so you said one is being humble.
Being the ability to learn from others. And when people walk in and say, I know how to do everything, that's a disaster for organizations.
Do people say that? Really?
They may not even be aware of it, but I've hired people that walked around and just literally told every single person in the place how to do their job. And it was absurd, And so I think it's just that ability to learn from other people and to come in and learn organizationally and in your job and get better and trying to always grow and get better. The other one, which to me is the most important, is relentless. I need to see relentlessness.
How do you see that?
In an interview, it may be hard. It's like that driven nature that I always ask people, what's your strongest quality, what's your weakest, and it's very interesting to see what they say.
You probably prepared in advance and
Yeah.
wrote on LinkedIn what to tell you. That
Well, the best.
oh, my weakness, I work too hard. You know that answers when
Yeah.
an employee comes to your job, they're like, so what's your weakness? They're like, I care too much. I work too hard. I was like,
Yeah.
you've read it in some book. That's the answer you got to give.
But some people will tell you their organizational skills, and you'll drill down on that and stuff like that. The best answer I ever had was from an Israeli friend of mine, and you'll appreciate this. Avi Berman, he came from Israel, and I said, "Then what's your strongest quality?" He says, "When I get going, nothing stops me." I said, "What's your weakest quality?" He said, "When I get going, nothing stops me." I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah, exactly.
I got
Yeah.
it."
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that you speak to other people also. Like you call people, you get references, other jobs, and they'll tell you like, "Oh wow, they had a hard job and they figure out how to get it done."
I had an employee that used to stay in the office till 10:30 at night. And it always looked to me that he was working extremely hard. And when I dived into the work he did, there was a lot of, he wasn't lying, he was working very hard. But it was a lot of fluff and unnecessary work. He exhausted everybody around him because,
sure.
So that was relentless, right? So if you drove by my office at 10:30
Well,
at night, you'll see
wasteful.
his office, with a light on. But again, I'm just playing ping pong here with you. Like, explain to me how you
I'll
think
define
about
relentless differently. I would say that, I tell this to my guys, when you come up against a brick wall, you got a couple options. You can go around it, you can go over it, you can go through it. If you go through it, you may have, some problem. But there's a way to get the other side. To me, relentless is figuring out how to get the other side of the brick wall. That's really it. It's not just busy work. It's like, and everyone gets this, where you're trying to do something, and all of a sudden, something, you're in real estate, and all of a sudden there's a permit issue, and you're in law, and all of a sudden in everything we do, there are things that try to stop us from doing what we want to do. Relentless people can push through, and they can problem solve, and they can figure out how to make things happen. How to jerry rig them and all the different pieces. That, to me, that's what relentlessness means.
And you can feel that doing an interview.
You can get a sense from them, and then you can speak to people that have been with them before.
So it seems like you're doing a lot of research. Like you actually pick up the phone, you call people, and you find out.
It depends on the job. How high level it is, how important. The higher level it is, the more important.
Like you said, lower to higher, faster to fire.
And we give personality tests also. So that
do
stuff comes
use
out.
that.
We do use that.
And do you find it effective?
Yeah, I find it effective. It depends on which one and what it tells you, and it's not always the whole story, but. It's to know if someone's a D, they have the disc, if you're driven, I'm a D, like off the chart, but sometimes that's not what I want if I have someone that I need to work with.
Depends on the position you're looking for, right?
Depends what I'm looking for. So, you don't want a D in HR,
Exactly.
So it's all those different qualities that and also, once you've hired so many people, you get a certain gut reaction to someone and some of the answers and what the story is. But again, to me, the resume is actually very, very important. I look at what they've done. Someone came to me, this is very recently, this guy's got a great resume, and I'm reading this stuff, and a lot of it was not paid, and a lot of it was, you could see where
there's some kind of a story you can read through the resume.
Yeah, resumes to me are even with this next generation that has the longer the jumps, but you can still tell a story for what they've been able to do.
Yeah. Okay. So, last question. You interacted in both non-for-profit and religious and spiritual world. Give me an example of someone who really inspired you as a leader. What made them so inspirational for you?
Do they have to be alive or
no? Well, if they were, I rather if you're someone you actually work with, and then we can take the next question and say, hey, who's the?
Okay, I'll do both. I'll do both.
Of course.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I've had some role models in my life,
and it might be even someone who you learn from, and you'll say, I will never work like that, and you don't have. Please don't mention their name, but I'm just saying, like someone like, look, that was their style, and what I learned from it is X. So that's what I'm looking for.
So I would say Rabbi Meir May. He is the executive director of Simon Wiesenthal Center. Simon Wiesenthal Center is a massive, international nonprofit. Trains so many law enforcement officers across the country. They've won 2 Oscars. They're pretty accomplished. He was there when I first started working at TCY. I got a region, I moved to LA. I was 27, 28. I was a young guy. I didn't really know that much. And we got friendly. We met someplace, and he was older than me, and he really mentored me. And he taught me, number one is integrity. He had tremendous integrity. Like he would what he said was what he meant. And he
so in your
played
perspective,
games.
integrity is really about honoring your word. Like if that's, people will know you as someone who, when you say something, it happens.
Yeah, and you know, you don't play games. You know, you and I both dealt in business with people that like, yeah, sure, it sounds good. And then next thing you know, they're selling something to someone else. And, you know, so integrity, he taught me how to be professional, you know, as a result. And I wound up, you know, with cufflinks and, you know, monogram, like, you know, just to always, like even here, like
It's supposed to be a casual
I know,
podcast.
like, you know,
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I should put my suit on.
You know, so, you know, you just, you know, my tie up and different pieces and because you're a professional and even though you're a rabbi and even though you're able to cater to those spiritual pieces, but you want to convey to people that you're a professional and you take things very seriously and you take them very seriously. And he kind of mentored me, and we would go out for lunches, and he gave me advice, you know, when I was either fundraising or I was running stuff and everything. And so for me, he really is a person I looked up to as a professional, as a kind of the person I wanted to be. And, you know, for once in a while, maybe I'll get a big gift or something like that, and I'll call him up and let him know. And I do let him know that he was a person that influenced me.
Is he still around?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. He's been in the Simon Wiesenthal Center for 50 years.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
He's absolutely
Are you making
amazing.
an effort to be that for the next generation of leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I don't think I'm as talented as he was, but
No, but I'm saying, are you being also a rabbi for the non-for-profit management? Like, are you tutoring? Are you helping younger people coming up the ladder? Of management?
Within my organization, I do it. I really, really try to do it. You know, we have a school, and I try and speak to the students. And I'm very available to students. If students want to speak to me, all they have to do is WhatsApp someone, and I'll set up time to speak to them about some idea they have or something like that. I speak to a lot of people from other organizations. My cell phone number is on LinkedIn. I keep it very public.
Your cell phone is on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I keep my
You heard that for the first, like,
yeah,
you know,
no,
this podcast is going to be
I'll
listened
give
by
it out to
thousands of people. You know?
646-830-0872.
That's
like,
insane.
You know, people
that's
WhatsApp
crazy.
me, and you know, if you have a question, like I'm not that important. You know,
No, but still, it's extraordinary.
You know, so I'm happy to speak to someone if they have an issue to try and help them through it. I believe in it. That's what, you know, that's
amazing.
That's why I do what I do. You know, it's
Very
all
generous. Very generous of you. That's really beautiful. So, but I want to honor your request for talking about someone who's no longer around. So who's a true leader? And I think I know, because I know you a little bit. I think who you're going to choose, but maybe you're going to choose someone else.
Let's hear
I thought you were going to say Moshe, like Moshe Rabbeinu, because it's a real. You use him every time you speak. You use it because he's such a. One of the reasons I like it so much is because he was so not perfect.
Yeah,
you know, like he's one of those characters. You see so many. What a huge task to take on, you know, at the same time.
And there's this great interaction with his father-in-law when his father-in-law says to him, he's like judging everyone all day, all night. His father's like, "Look, this is going to kill you. You gotta set up a structure here, and you got to delegate."
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
Like, you know, the people I would have said is I would have said King David, and I always talk about King David. I read his story over and over again. I always say that in the beginning of his life, his father-in-law tried to kill him. At the end of his life, his son tried to kill him. Yeah. The middle, the Philistines tried to kill him, and he got a lot done. You know, he just set up that whole story. You know,
wow.
But honestly, I would just kind of close with my father. Probably my father was a rabbi for 45 years, and you know, passed away about 3.5 years ago. And I look at so much. You know, I think most people are like this. You don't really understand it till they're gone. I didn't really fully understand how much of what I do came from him and from his, you know, the love he had for me and the guidance and all those things. So.
Well, we started with God and we ended with Father.
Yeah.
So. Steve, thank you so much.
But my pleasure. You know,
thanks for being my friend,
and
thanks for being part of this extraordinary conversation.
Amazing,
right,
amazing.
Perfect.
God bless this podcast. Let's
exactly.
I'm going to be praying for it, and it's going to be the most listened to podcast.
Thank you. Perfect. So, playbook. I want you to be really honest with yourself, and then we're going to test it with reality. Take an area that is important to you, and could be your health, your fitness, your business, a particular section of your business, your relationship, and rate it 1 to 10. 10, everything goes exactly the way you want. It is perfect. It's going beyond your dreams and it's growing all the time. 0 is I failed miserably, and most people will be somewhere between, I would say, 4 to 6. Depends how you feel about it. And be really honest about it and say, look, I've been saying I've been committed for a long time to this thing, but the reality is I'm only getting scored 4 to 6. I want you to really think about it and imagine how would it look like if you were at 8 or at 9. How would life look like if you actually operate 9? And then take the score you scored yourself, because some of us are very critical with each other or with ourselves. Some people are over-optimistic, or we lie to ourselves. And go and ask 3 people that you know and they know you, what will they give them? What will they give you in that score? And that's critical. And you got to go to people who are actually going to be honest with you. So you maybe look at your health and fitness and say, I am a 7. I'm doing okay. I'm a little overweight, or I don't go to the gym, but overall I'm fine. And then you go to your best 3 friends and say, what are you? And they'll say, you're at 4. The reality is probably closer to what they rated than actually what you rated. And then the next conversation to have is, okay, if I am at 5, let's just say out of 10, am I really committed to the game? Because many times you say, I'm really committed to health and fitness, but then you actually in reality are more committed to ice cream and cakes. There's nothing wrong with it. I just want you to be happy. But get, first of all, really straight about it. And when you get straight about it, you can say, what game do I want to play? Do I want to play the, I'm good enough, I'm going to have a cake whenever I want, I'm going to have the ice cream whenever I want, but I'm actually, keeping somewhat of a health path? Or you say, no, I am really committed to 8, 9, or 10 performance. That will alter the way you look at it. That will change the way you behave. You cannot play on a 4 or 5 level expecting a 9 results. That doesn't work this way. So after getting really honest with the scores, then we can take the next few weeks, we can take the book and do exercises to elevate the game for 4 or 5. But the first thing to do is to get really straight and get feedback from people around you. But where are you actually scoring? That's a playbook.